When did you realize your best friend was no longer your best friend? When, at my birthday party, she ate a fortune cookie and we asked what the fortune was, and she jokingly said, "My best friend will murder me tonight." Then she looked at someone else in the room and backed away, and acted afraid, and said, "Keep him away from me." Everybody laughed, and I don't think she had any idea what just happened, but that was when I realized that my best friend didn't consider me hers. When he asked me to show up 3 hours before our shift together, to hang out at his place, he answered the door, said, "Oh sorry man, we fell asleep," then went back to bed with his girlfriend, and left me standing in the front room until I decided to leave. Sat at work for 2.5 hours before my shift, because I live an hour and a half away. Closely followed by the night he texted me when my friend was playing a gig at a bar. He said, "Hey man, stay put and miss your last bus. We are coming over and you can come crash at our place after last call." Then he texted me 20 minutes after my last bus, 40 minutes later, saying, "Oh sorry man, we got too stoned and dozed off." My best friend during junior and high school was poor, so I always spotted him when we went to eat or see movies. I never expected anything in return, but later on I was going through some hard times, and he had it a bit better. The guy was a cheap fuck that wouldn't even spot me a soda or lend me $5. I must have spent thousands over the years helping him out. Lesson: a person that takes and takes without ever offering to chip in will most likely be a toxic cheap fuck not worth your friendship. I had a best friend in high school. I started realizing she wasn't my best friend when she'd keep canceling plans with me, and most of the time, when we'd hang out, it was because we saw each other at school already earlier in the day. I came to the conclusion that how can I consider this person be my best friend if she doesn't make that much time for me when we don't go to the same school anymore? She also disappeared out of my life 95% plus of the time every time she had a boyfriend, and would come back to me when she was single. I have another friend who makes time for me always in her schedule, regardless of where we work or go to school. This friend even wants to go on vacations with me, so I slowly started realizing this person was my real best friend. When she got blackout drunk at my wedding, told everyone she hated the rest of the wedding party, puked all over the hotel hallway, took off early the next day, and wanted an apology from me for not making her maid of honor. Woo. When she got a new boyfriend and didn't bother speaking to me for months, and when I started conversations I'd only get half-assed replies. Someone who ditches her entire group of friends because there's a new guy in her life is not someone I think I want in my life. I told them I was sick, really sick, and I never heard from them again. They called again months later to ask for something, and I couldn't barely contain my anger, though I still sent them what they wanted. I just found out I'm pregnant, and it feels weird not sharing the news, like I've forgotten to tell someone. But I know inviting them back, it will only end in tears and hurt feelings again. When she decided that I was a default friend, she basically only wanted to hang out when her real best friend was busy. We had been friends for 6 years before her BFF Amber came around. I recently moved to a different state and, right before I left she said, "I'll miss you." But imagine how much of a wreck I'd be if Amber moved. When he stripped naked, wandered around the house shouting at our other roommate while drinking out of a liter bottle of vodka, his third for that morning. Then he took all the food out of the refrigerator and dumped a gallon, yes a full gallon jug, of ranch dressing over the food that I had just bought. Also, sometime during the second bottle of vodka, he tried to put on my wedding dress a size medium woman's to his 6 foot plus 320 pound frame, and got it covered in booze and motor oil. It was stored in a trunk in the garage. He actually dug it out to try on. We had been friends since 2nd grade. This happened after our 25 reunion. When he but DL'd me, and I listened as he laid out his plan to have his girlfriend flirt me into working at his store for free. Needless to say, forewarned is forearmed, and the last 3 months of our friendship didn't go so well for him. A felony conviction, 7 months in prison, and the permanent removal of his civil rights gives me the feeling I won that little exchange. Fucking shitbag. When I got some self-esteem and saw what a dick he was to me, he'd steal from me. He used me emotionally, I was just a shoulder to cry on. By the end, he'd come over a wreck and just sobbed to be about whatever the latest transgression between him and his girl was. I was always incredibly generous to him, never said no when he needed something. Always there, always available. Then whenever I needed something from him, the answer was always no. I'd always had pretty low self-esteem, but by my late 20s it started to build, and I started to see our friendship for what it was. I was the giver, and he was the taker. By that point our contact was sporadic, and I just cut it off completely. Fuck you scene. After joining the AF, he moved to Maryland. We kept in touch for years sporadically, but recently I heard he had been in town several times. His mom's house is literally a half mile from mine. When I heard this, it happened to be at a time when he was actually in town. I never got so much as a phone call, so that pretty much concluded that friendship, I suppose. When she asked me to be a bridesmaid, I of course said yes. Then a month or two later there were pictures on Facebook of her and her other bridesmaids getting dresses together. There was no message, phone call, anything from her. We were best friends since first grade until around just after high school, when we just started drifting. Some sort of notification would have been nice, but life. When we realized we had absolutely nothing in common. He was literally this outdoorsy mountain hiking man, pretty much like that Man vs Wild guy. Those people who would go camping and tying knots, going canoeing and all that bullshit like every week. Meanwhile there's me who is very into comic books and video games and loves reading a good book inside. To those Hollywood execs who insist on having two completely characters as best friends for eternity, it's bullshit lol. It was when I realized how one-sided the friendship was. She didn't really care about me, she just used me as a place to vent, and if I wasn't available right when she wanted me to be, it's not like I have a family to take care of or anything. I would never hear the end of it. But when I had an issue or needed to vent, she would remind me that what I was going through wasn't nearly as bad as what she had going on, so I had no right to complain. At one point I gently tried to point out that there were solutions to many of her issues, but let's just say that it wasn't well received. After a good 20 minutes of non-stop berating, I decided I had had enough of that toxic relationship and completely cut ties. In spite of how she treated me, it sucked losing my best friend of 8 years. When she lost her job, met a guy one night, then invited him to live in her room without paying rent for months. Got pregnant from said guy, married him and moved out owing me $800 and refused to respond to my calls/text/messages. Then I found her at a bar almost a year later, when she proceeded to apologize and said she was going through a rough time, which I get, and that she would add me on FB and we could catch up. She never did, and the next time I saw her a few months after that, she pretended that she had sent it and said she was gonna send it again. Needless to say, it never happened. We had become best friends when we were 6 years. She moved away in the 6th grade, but we still managed to keep in contact. Then she moved back for our senior year of high school. That turned out to be a horrible year, even though we still remained close. After high school we attended the same college together. I moved 12 hours away after college and she moved back to the small town we are from. We had made it a point to at least talk to each other once a week on the phone. Then things just changed. I was becoming more independent, making friends, and dating more. She on the other hand lives at home with her parents and hangs out high school kids. A couple weeks ago a big thing happened in my life and all I wanted to do was tell her. She wouldn't even give me a chance to tell her. All she wanted to talk about was small town drama. I realized right then that we were no longer best friends. I had seen this coming for a couple years. It had always been a one-sided friendship. Anytime we would hang out it always had to be when she could fit it in her busy schedule. Even our weekly phone call turned into that. The only time she had time for the call was on her way home for work for 10 minutes. It was really starting to annoy me. It was like I wasn't that important to her anymore. I'm relieved to be done with the friendship. We were best friends all the way through junior high and high school, and were roommates our first year of college. I treated him, if this is the right way to put it, too much like a sibling and not like a best friend. I was hard on him, would lose my temper too easily, was demanding of him, One night he and some other mutual friends were supposed to pick me up to go out drinking, and they just didn't show up. They apologized profusely, and we still hung out after that, but slowly drifted apart. I made new friends, and after a while started seeing my behavior in others, which made assess my past behavior. It hurt a lot, but over time I realized it was mostly my fault. It made me a better person. I think it made me a bit more withdrawn from people, but I learned to be a better friend and not be so hard on people. After a 10-year friendship and my boyfriend died, is when I really realized BFF was such a bitch and stopped being friends. So pretty much the first guy I had ever loved died the day before my high school graduation. So she's had many guys she's loved and banged, and was at a fork in the road between two ex-boyfriends. But oh no, Woman cannot love anyone, it's just not possible. So Kurt died, and they figured I didn't date him long enough to me to actually love him, like they have said in that part of my life. An argument ensued, then I was getting prank calls on my cell, work, and home phone. I knew exactly who it was. So after days of 30+ calls a day I got sick of it, and realized I can do that too. So I did. Well, then I got a call from an angry ex-friend as to why she's getting pranked, but the thing is she was holding Kurt's favorite shirt hostage. Finally we came to an agreement. The prank calling will stop if I get his shirt back. Seemed harmless. Went to pick up my shirt she left at my house. I hurried up and ran to my porch to grab it. As I ran back with it in my arms, something fell. Turns out a sleeve was chopped off. Turns out they destroyed Kurt's shirt. It was covered in sayings like "Where's the pills, bitch, I killed myself to get away from you," and things like that. Then it was covered in ketchup, mustard, and a few guys had jacked off onto it. 10 years of being friends and she easily did that to me, which is horribly sad, since we always saw an awesome future of us having kids and them being BFFs and being silly in nursing homes when we were really old. When we would grab a beer after work and talk, and I couldn't relate to anything going on in his life anymore. His involvement with the church. I left the church 8 years ago. His issues with his marriage. Never married. And felt like his marriage was a mistake from the start. And his kids. Don't have any. Don't want any. The things we used to have in common don't interest him anymore. And the things that interest him now don't interest me. Doesn't make either of us wrong per se. Just means we grew apart. I have 2 of these. When I realized how often she would make me feel bad about myself. When she stole from me, and when I brought up the items and the fact that I wanted them back. She claimed they'd been hers for years: a TV, a VCR, a pair of boots. When I realized how trashy she was. When I realized I was happier not hanging out with her than I was hanging out with her. For the second girl, who was actually first, she was a doozy, compulsive liar. She wrote a note in high school that she claimed a guy wrote to another of her friends, an acquaintance of mine, that she had found and was concerned about. It very graphically described how the guy would rape and slit the throats of the friend and all of her friends if she tried to leave him. I convinced her to turn it into the principal. She then later somehow convinced me that the girl herself had done it. I hated this girl for that. I mean, what kind of awful person does that, right? I know now that in fact my friend had written it. I still can't fathom why. She lied about being raped. She lied about being pregnant and having a miscarriage. For attention. 5 times. She lied about being in a lockdown in the hospital she worked at once because she said there was a man who came into the air brandishing a gun to get attention from her recent ex, who happened to be another friend of mine. What did she expect him to do? He lived in another state, for crying out loud. Did she think he'd race down here, sweep her off her feet and drive off into the sunset together? They broke up because of many reasons. Her personal hygiene was horrible. Her breath always stank. Her skin and hair was always greasy. Her hair was so matted that he had to have the mats cut out. Every time she had her legs apart, the stench would clear a room. She threatened to kill herself if he broke up with her. She didn't. She called an ambulance for herself multiple times at work, different job than the hospital job, so that she wouldn't have to stay. She never had a clear, legitimate reason. I don't feel good, or I feel uneasy, or I think I might have a panic attack later, despite the fact that she'd never been diagnosed with anxiety of any kind ever. She got fired from several jobs for calling in too much within the span of a few months. She ended up getting them evicted because she was blowing money she didn't have, and he didn't know about it until it was too late. He's not spotless in this, of course. They were really toxic together. When we lived together a long time ago in my first apartment, she took her bank account and my half of the rent and went on a vacation with her boyfriend at the time and paid for all of it with her money as a treat to the boyfriend. I managed to not get myself evicted by explaining what happened to the landlord who knew she was shady. He explained that she was being evicted, but he wouldn't evict me. I still had to move out because I couldn't afford the rent alone. She stole from me a lot. She stole other people's work constantly, which I didn't find out until recently, and it made me angry all over again. She constantly lied about me to make herself look better to people. She was overweight and didn't take care of herself and did bad in school, and I was the opposite. I'm glad that friendship was over. It went out in a glorious blaze, and I'm so glad it's over. When we lived together, and he would smoke weed until he was numb every day, lied to his parents about schooling, even though they paid his tuition and rent, wasting thousands of their dollars. Woke up and did bong hits, pretty much lived in the living room, left a bowl of tuna fish out for a fucking week until it was rotten. But the icing on the cake was when he had one of his friends over who was 6 months pregnant and smoked weed and drank in our apartment. I asked him to talk to her about it and he said, "It's not my responsibility." He was the smartest guy I knew. 10 years of friendship down the drain. He's working in a donut shop now and trying to be a rapper. Good riddance.